The world stopped for a moment when President Donald Trump appeared before the cameras at the White House. The briefing room was filled with reporters, flashing bulbs, and the restless hum of anticipation. Trump adjusted the microphone and spoke with his trademark bluntness. "Effective immediately," he declared. "The United States is suspending all financial and military assistance to Ukraine. America will not bankroll foreign wars anymore. It's time for Europe to step up and handle its own backyard." The room erupted. Journalists shouted questions, but Trump waved them off and walked out. Within minutes, every news channel across the globe carried the breaking headline: "Trump ends Ukraine funding." In Kyiv, panic spread like wildfire. The president's office went silent as the announcement echoed from the television. Volodymyr Zelensky sat frozen behind his desk, the blue and yellow flag of Ukraine standing tall beside him. Around him, his advisors exchanged anxious looks. "It's a bluff," one whispered. "He'll reverse it." Another shook his head. "He won't, he means it." Zelensky's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. "Call Washington," he ordered. "Get me anyone from the State Department, anyone." But no one answered. Calls went unanswered, emails bounced between departments, and the reality began to sink in. Kyiv was truly alone. Outside, the city buzzed with confusion and anger. Protesters gathered in Maidan Square carrying signs that read, "No abandonment," and "We stand alone." Soldiers in uniform watched the crowd quietly, their faces expressionless. Everyone knew that without American weapons and funds, the war effort could not hold for long. That evening, Zelensky convened an emergency session of the National Security Council. Maps were spread across the table, red markers showing Russian advances in the east. "We have enough ammunition for 6 weeks, a general reported grimly. "After that, our lines will collapse." Zelensky leaned forward, his voice low but fierce. "If the world turns its back, we'll still stand. We fought alone before, and we'll do it again." Thunder rumbled outside, shaking the windows of the presidential office. As lightning flashed over the Dnipro River, a sense of fate settled over Kyiv. The alliance that once sustained them was gone, and the next chapter of Ukraine's struggle had just begun. In Moscow, the air inside the Kremlin felt electric. The chandeliers above the War Council room gleamed as if reflecting the mood of triumph that swept through Russia's corridors of power. President Vladimir Putin sat at the head of a long, polished table, a faint smile tugging at his lips as his top advisors gathered around. A large digital map of Eastern Europe glowed before them, Ukraine marked in blue, Russian-controlled regions pulsing in red. "Mr. President," one general began, "the Americans have finally cut Ukraine off. Trump's statement was confirmed an hour ago. No new weapons, no money, nothing." Putin leaned back in his chair, folding his hands calmly. "Excellent," he said softly, his tone almost casual. "Then the West's illusion of unity has ended." He turned to his intelligence chief. "How are the Ukrainians reacting?" The man smirked. "Chaos. Kyiv is panicking. There are protests in the streets, and Zelensky is scrambling for European support. But Europe is divided. Some want peace, others fear provoking us." Putin chuckled quietly, the sound low and deliberate. "Then we will give them a reason to fear." Across the room, military planners spread out new offensive maps. They discussed troop reinforcements, missile supplies, and fresh propaganda campaigns. Russian state media already spun the story as a victory. "The Americans are tired of funding corruption." One anchor proclaimed on television, "Even their strongest ally sees the truth. Ukraine is finished." But not everyone in the Kremlin was celebrating. General Gerasimov, the head of the armed forces, cleared his throat. "Sir, a desperate enemy can be dangerous. If Kyiv feels abandoned, they might strike deep into our border cities." Putin's eyes narrowed. "Let them try," he said. "Their desperation will justify our response." Outside, snow began to fall over Red Square, the golden domes of Moscow glowing beneath the winter sky. Crowds gathered around giant screens, replaying Trump's announcement, cheering and waving Russian flags. For Putin, it was more than a victory, it was vindication. After years of isolation, sanctions and stalemate, fate had handed him the advantage he had waited for. Still, in the back of his mind, He knew wars were never predictable. Desperation could turn even the weakest opponent into something dangerous. And somewhere deep down, a thought whispered, "This may not end as easily as it seems." Morning broke over Kyiv with an uneasy silence. The city, still reeling from Trump's announcement, felt different, heavier, angrier. Streets that once hummed with defiant optimism were now filled with whispers of betrayal. Newspapers screamed headlines like, "Abandoned again," and "America turns its back." The mood was grim, but beneath the despair burned something far more dangerous: rage. Inside the presidential bunker, Volodymyr Zelensky convened an emergency meeting of the National Security and Defense Council. Around the oval table sat generals, intelligence officers, and ministers, their faces lit by the cold blue light of the situation screens. Maps showed Russian positions pushing closer to the eastern cities, while drone footage revealed fresh enemy troop movements near the borders. Zelensky's tone was sharp, almost trembling with fury. "If Washington wants to watch, let them. But we will not die quietly." He slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing in the chamber. "If the world won't listen to our pleas, maybe they'll hear our strikes." A murmur ran through the room. The head of intelligence, grim and cautious, leaned forward. "Mr. President, with all due respect, an attack inside Russian territory could escalate beyond control. They would use it as an excuse for total war." Zelensky didn't flinch. "They're already waging total war," he replied. "We're just pretending we have rules left to follow." By midnight, orders were signed. Ukrainian drone units, operating in secrecy, prepared for missions beyond the border. The targets were strategic but symbolic: fuel depots, communication centers, and airfields near Belgorod and Kursk. It wasn't about military gain. It was a message. Hours later, the first explosions ripped through the quiet Russian dawn. Fireballs lit the sky, and thick black smoke spiraled upward. Russian state media immediately blamed. "Kyiv, Ukrainian terrorists strike again," they declared, vowing revenge. In Kyiv, Zelensky appeared on television, his expression defiant but exhausted. "They thought Ukraine would kneel when abandoned," he said firmly. "But we do not kneel. We fight even when alone." The speech electrified the nation. Crowds gathered in the cold streets, waving flags and chanting his name. But deep inside his war room, Zelensky knew this was only the beginning. The line between defense and desperation had vanished, and once crossed, there would be no going back. In Washington, political chaos erupted overnight. Trump's sudden cutoff of Ukrainian funding divided the nation. Cable networks played the announcement on endless loops as senators shouted across news panels. Supporters praised Trump for putting America first, while critics called it a betrayal that handed victory to Moscow. The Capitol buzzed with accusations, investigations, and talk of emergency hearings. Behind closed doors, intelligence officials warned, Ukraine won't survive the winter without support. The front could collapse, but the president remained unmoved. "Let Europe handle it," Trump said. "We're done paying for their wars." Across the ocean, the effects were immediate. In Kyiv, the atmosphere inside the presidential bunker had grown cold and tense. Rumors swirled through military channels, rumors that Zelensky had lost control, that some generals were secretly meeting Western envoys, and that a plan was forming to replace him with someone more pragmatic. Every hour brought new reports of internal divisions. Some commanders argued for negotiations. Others wanted to strike harder. The unity that had once defined Ukraine's resistance began to fracture. Zelensky barely slept. His eyes were sunken, his voice hoarse from sleepless nights of emergency meetings. Trusted allies grew distant. He could feel the walls closing in, politically and literally. One evening, as sirens wailed across Kyiv, he turned to his aide and whispered, "They want me gone, maybe even my own people." The next morning, foreign diplomats quietly fled the capital. The American embassy reduced its staff, while European leaders hesitated to send more aid. The global spotlight had shifted elsewhere, to new elections, new conflicts, and the endless churn of news. Ukraine's struggle was becoming yesterday's story. Meanwhile, on the front lines, Russian troops advanced through shattered villages. Drones hovered over blackened fields. Ukrainian units, running low on ammunition, fell back under relentless fire. A colonel radioed to Kyiv, his voice breaking, "We can't hold much longer," as explosions echoed across the horizon. Zelensky sat alone in a dimly lit command room, staring at a map scattered with blinking red zones. His hand trembled as he traced the advancing line of enemy forces. "We fought for freedom," he murmured, "and now we're fighting to exist." Outside, the night sky glowed orange from distant fires. The once proud capital waited in silence, uncertain if its leader would endure or be consumed by the very storm he had sworn to defy.